What's the darkest secret you found out about a family member, relative?
My step-grandfather had a completely hidden life in Australia before he met my grandmother. He had a family and kids in Australia and faked his death by driving his car off a cliff then moving to America. His kids thought he was dead until my grandmother found out about them and reached out years later. His son actually became a famous comedian over there, and from what I know has a joke he does at his shows about his father faking his death to disconnect from them. Edit, yes, it's Greg Fleet.
Both of my mother's parents had affairs without the other's knowledge. My grandmother had Parkinson's, and in one of her confused states she told my grandfather that she had an affair. Suffice to say, my grandfather was not happy and put her in a home. He then started talking to my mother trying to figure out when it could have happened. He speculated that it happened around the same time he was having his affair, which was around 1966. My mother was shocked. She was born in 1967. So my mother may or may not be an illegitimate child.
Found out the hard way that my grandfather was a sexual predator. Turns out my grandmother had been in denial despite both my aunts, their friends, and young girls in their small town claiming he raped/molested them. One 16-year-old even got pregnant, and he paid for the abortion. Grandma lied about his whereabouts/activities for years to protect him because if he went to jail she'd be unable to afford their house. So, long story short, me and my then 10-year-old cousin were his latest and final victims. Thanks, Grandma.
My mom and dad decided to take in my 3 cousins because their mom got into a horrible car accident. 2 girls and 1 boy. The girls were 6 and 10, the boy 12. Fast forward to when the 6-year-old girl is 14 years old and is asked about birth control. She starts sobbing, saying her brother, the then 12 years old, took her virginity when she was 6 and that it continued until she was about 13. We had no clue.
I found out that my great-grandpa got away with murder. He thought that my great-grandma was cheating on him with her dentist, so he went into his office and shot him. He got away with it too, and they didn't find out that he did it until he told everybody before he died. Edit, since a lot of people are asking if she actually cheated on him. I don't know, but, considering he was an asshole that she was afraid to leave and he ended up being capable of murder. Probably.
One of my aunts raised another aunt's baby as her own. My mom had 4 sisters and a brother, all of whom got married and had kids, so I have around 20 cousins. Unfortunately, 3 of my aunts got breast cancer in their 30s. All 3 recovered, but years later the youngest, Maria, got it again and got it worse. Maria needed a bone marrow transplant. All her sisters and children got tested, but no one matched. The family then revealed that Maria had had a teenage pregnancy. Her first child was actually my cousin John, who had been adopted and raised by my oldest aunt as her second child. None of the cousins knew about this, including John and his revealed to be adoptive siblings. John was asked to get tested and was a match, so he agreed to donate bone marrow to his birth mom, Maria. John was in his late 20s at the time and had had very little contact with Maria over his life, so he's pretty cool. The transplant took, but Maria eventually succumbed a year or so later.
My uncle didn't have an aneurysm stroke spontaneously. Sorry, I'm not a doctor, he deliberately stopped taking his blood thinners. Dude was 63 with a wife, 4 kids and 15 grandkids, the oldest of which was 13 and the youngest was not even a year. He was just done. His wife doesn't know, his kids don't know. I only know cause I overheard the family doctor telling my dad. As far as I know, only myself, the doctor, and my dad know.
Here goes, my 2 remaining grandparents, my father's father and my mother's mother, married each other when they were 75. This made my mother and father step-brother and step-sister. Since the son of my father's sister, my aunt, is my cousin, and the son of my mother's brother, my uncle, is also my cousin, I became both cousins. I am, therefore, my own cousin. I'll never be alone.
That my grandfather murdered his own brother to inherit his money. Edit, it's kinda funny that I received wholesome awards talking about how my grandfather was a murderer. Lol.
My dad told me that, before my mom and dad broke up, he hadn't been happy with her for several years. My mother even had a miscarriage at one point, which destroyed the both of them. But he couldn't leave her, because he was afraid that she would hurt or even kill herself. So his only thought was to have a kid with her, so that motherly instinct would hopefully prevent her from killing herself.
Since a lot of these are about murders and rapists, mine is a bit funny. We once found a family photo album in my wacky aunt's house. Start flipping through the plastic pages and boom. Gang bang photos. There had to be like 20 to 30 people in these photos. It was back in the 80s, I'd imagine, and everyone was so hairy and ugly. I guess Aunt Jan is part of a swinging community. Edit, wow. Thank you everyone. This is the first time I've gotten a lot of love on here. It's a funny story only me and my brothers know. We've always considered our Aunt Jan to be very weird, but after seeing that album it all kinda made sense. Nice lady though.
I recently found out that my grandmother committed suicide as a result of the sexual abuse she received from her grandfather as a child aged 8 to 14. Apparently her mother and many of her relatives were compliant with it and would even send her to his house for week-long visits where she would sleep in his bed.
I found out 2 years ago that my mother had a baby she gave up for adoption 18 months before she had me, and then had another baby when I was 3, and she also gave that baby up for adoption. All 3 of us have different fathers, and I think the only reason she kept me was because my father married her, but that marriage only lasted a year. My mother remarried when I was 5 and my half-brother was born when I was 7. As far as I knew for 59 years he and I were our mother's only children. I never saw her pregnant with the second baby because she sent me to live with my great-grandparents across the country during her pregnancy. My mother and grandmother were the only people who knew about this, and they both took the secret to their graves. The only reason any of it was found out is because of all of the DNA testing people now do. This discovery really impacted my sense of identity for a while, my view of my mother, and our relationship. I've met my half-siblings, an older sister and younger brother. I like them and I'm glad I've been able to answer some of their questions, but the initial discovery really messed with me for a bit.
A relative tried to poison one of their guests. Once I learned about it, it finally sealed the deal for me and forever changed my view on them. They were bonkers anyway, but good lord, that's too much.
My parents had a nasty divorce which was often accompanied by a lot of beep about each other. There was a lot of, well, your mother blah blah blah, and your dad is such and such, most of which I would just ignore because it was incredibly immature and embarrassing, until one day my mom broke out the big guns. My siblings and I were just watching TV in the living room one day and the conversation moved to my dad coming to town to visit, at which point my mom overheard. The mere mention of dad prompted this woman to stop whatever she was doing, come into the living room, and say something along the lines of, "Talking about your dad again, huh? Did you know that he was molested?" My dad had never mentioned anything about it in the 18 years that I lived with him, which is understandable. To this day, I have no idea why my mom felt the need to blurt that out to the 3 of us, or why it is she thought that being the victim of sexual abuse was a stain on someone's character, but it was a really weird way to find out something so deeply personal about my dad. TLDR, my mom told my siblings and I that my dad was molested when he was little as a way to spite him. Edit. Just for clarification and to ease my conscience, my mom was actually a great mom. She practically raised us on her own, and the divorce wasn't her fault in the slightest. She got hit with the death of both of her parents and a divorce all within a 2-year time span, on top of losing the house. This was completely out of character for her, which is part of why it caught all of us off guard. She's a good woman that said something beep that she now regrets. Judge as you will, but I had to clear the air after all of the "your mom is a beep" comments.
My biological grandfather threatened to kill my grandmother while she was very young and pregnant with my uncle. Long story short, he was engaged to someone else. My grandmother became a nervous wreck while pregnant and wouldn't leave the house, and he used to throw bricks through the window. Eventually she told some of her friends about what he'd threatened to do to her. Shortly after that he went missing, never to be seen or heard from again. We always kind of laughed and joked that one of her friends must have threatened him or ran him out of town. We would even go as far to say someone might have killed him for her. It wasn't until we were going through her boxes of photos and love letters, we realized she was actually friends with the Cray twins.
My uncle's family claimed he had polio instead of a hereditary crippling disease. His wife figured it out when she went to their family reunion. She already had 1 child and was pregnant with another.
Well, my family is mega beep as it is. Sisters living in a crack house on heroin. brother and his wife are addicted to meth and coke. The other 3 siblings are all on coke. I'm literally the only one of us that saw that behavior and was like, yeah, not for me.
My uncle tells the story that when he was a kid, his older brother wanted him to go out hunting with him in the woods near their house. They woke up really early, and started walking much deeper into the woods than they usually did, and way off the normal trails they used. My uncle realized his brother was letting him get further and further ahead. He stopped and turned around to see his brother starting to bring the shotgun up in his direction. He asked him what the hell was he doing. His brother said, "Oh, I thought I saw something." My uncle decided to go back at that point. Later that week he went back and found a pit that someone had dug a bit further off the trail. He never went anywhere with his brother alone again.
I found out my father raped my sister when I was 11 years old. She was only 7 when he was sexually abusing her.
My great uncle was murdered along with his wife. The murder suspect was run down and got stuck in a swamp, shot himself in the head. And #X200B. The strange particulars. My uncle, his wife, and the murderer were all deaf/mute. The murderer was renting a room from them. This happened in the 40s, and no one ever found the motive. And #X200B. A few years ago, I took a DNA test, and found that I had cousins who had descended from the murderer's wife. And #X200B. Turns out my great uncle was cuckolding him.
I found out that my great-grandpa wasn't actually my great-grandpa because my great-grandma had my grandma, her daughter, with a famous boxer who was extremely abusive. She divorced him after having kids with him and met my great-grandpa while she was supervising the manufacturing of B-25 bombers during WW2. My mom and I are the only ones, besides my grandparents, that know the true story. Edit, holy beep, I was not expecting this to blow up like it did. If anyone wants to hear more, I'd be willing to go more in depth. Edit 2, I talked to my mom about the story and turns out that my great-grandma's first husband, the boxer, died, and that she wore a red dress to his funeral.
A great uncle went to prison for statutory rape. It only takes a few minutes around him to know he's disgusting.
My great-grandpa was part of the Nazis and killed Jews. He did believe that it was right. He died during a transport of prisoners of war from some illness. Justified. He was an awful person.
That my cousin has been having an affair and physically abuses her husband because he won't believe the texts aren't real and that she threatened to kill him and her kids.
Oof, my mom saw her friend die in front of her because of a bus. My mom even said that she saw her intestines coming out her mouth. Mind you, my mom was I think 9 or 10 years old at the moment. After she told me about that, I never questioned her again about her past because who knows what else she went through. I may think she is problematic, but seeing her sad is not my goal at all, and I felt terrible for her, and for the kid.
My dad told me he had a half-brother when he was 90.
I'm the only child between my mom and dad, but they both had children from previous relationships. All of my siblings were 15 plus years older than me. When I was 7, my mom and dad split because my dad had feelings for my mom's oldest daughter who already had 4 kids. Okay, gross and beep, but both adults, so whatever. Cut to 13 years or so later and my dad is suddenly all in involved in the life of one of the kids of that sister. 20-yo me was oblivious as to why this was happening. Took me another 7 years to put all the pieces together that my dad was the father of that kid. I had grown up thinking she was just niece, but she was in reality my half-sister niece. I've never discussed it with anyone in my family. My mom died before I put all the pieces together. But wait, there's more. My family and I are all from Mississippi. Cue Deliverance banjo music. My dad was born in 1945, so unsurprisingly, he's super racist. And I mean like, super racist. That sister niece of mine? She ended up having 2 kids with one-legged black man. The one-legged part isn't really relevant except for him showing up to my house one day and suddenly doing push-ups in my living room for no apparent reason. Anyway, karma's a beep. Cheat on my mom with your stepdaughter, get her knocked up, basically have nothing to do with said child's life, then the child goes and commits, in his eyes, probably the biggest betrayal possible. I would throw a chef's kiss right here, except all I really care about from this story is the pain it must have put my mom through, and I was too young or oblivious to be there for her. Miss you, Cotty.
A cousin confided in me a month ago that she was molested by my grandfather when we were kids. She even told me that I was there with her when this was happening, and I somehow don't remember anything about it. I hope he's burning in hell for it.
May your day be filled with joy and happiness. And please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more quality content every day.